Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to introducing our presenters. So, got two presenters today. Our first will be Nicholas Swanson. Nicholas earned his PhD in economics from the University of California at Berkeley and is now currently working with the King Center on Global Development at Stanford University as a postdoctoral fellow. His research focuses primarily on development economics and includes other fields such as behavioral economics, psychology and economics, and labor economics. In 2025, he will join the World Bank as an economist, Impact Evaluation Department. And then our second presenter is Shashwat Dhar. Shashwat is a PhD candidate in political science at Vanderbilt University. His research lies at the intersections of comparative political economy and political behavior, with a specific emphasis on migration, accountability, and identity politics in South Asia. In this work, he triangulates observational, experimental, and qualitative approaches using diverse data sources such as panel designs, original household surveys, experiments, focus groups, and extensive ethnographic fieldwork. Welcome to both of you. And with that, Nicholas, you are invited to take the floor.
Terrific. So it's exciting to be here today. Thanks for the invitation to present. I'm going to be presenting sort of results from one of my ongoing projects, which is called All in the Family, Kinship Pressure and Firm Worker Matching. So kind of a starting point for this project is the fact that in a lot of low-income countries, a lot of businesses hire from their family as workers in their business. And by this, I mean not just sort of, I bring in my child to work as an unpaid laborer in my business, but even sort of for paid labor, a lot of times people will draw on their extended family network to work for them. So think of people like cousins, nephews and nieces, in-laws, people like this. So this is a really striking fact. We don't see this so much in higher income countries. And economists have come up with a bunch of different reasons that this might be the case. So it might be about trust or altruism, wanting to help your family. And another reason that they've come up that this might be the case is because it actually might be sort of easier to manage or get your related employees to work hard for you in the business. Maybe they care about your success more than someone who's not related to you, and so they work for you very hard. And so the starting point for this project is we just go to firm owners in Eastern Province, Zambia, and we ask them what they think about this. So do they think that employees in your business who are related to you work harder for you than unrelated employees, or they work less hard for you, or they work the same? And what you see is that there's this big sort of divergence in opinion. So 40% or so of firm owners agree with economists and say, yeah, it's true. Like my family are great employees. They work really, really hard for me. I don't have to motivate them. But around half of business owners say exactly the opposite. They say family is the worst to manage. I don't want to have them in my business at all. And typically the story there is something like, look, I hire my nephew or my niece, they come and they know I can't fire them, because if I fire them, their uncle is going to come to me and be like, why the heck did you fire this guy? It's going to be a whole issue in the family. So I never fire them. And so because they know I'll never fire them, they never end up working very hard. And so this idea that it can actually be hard sometimes to motivate your relatives to work is something I found really interesting, and something that's also been found in other works in similar settings. Now, this might not matter that much for firm productivity, because it might just be that all the family firms that we see are the ones who hire, sort of relatives who work really well for them, and those who think that their family wouldn't work well for them just don't hire their relatives. But then sort of a second interesting fact that I found talking to Zambian firm owners was that a lot of them said that they actually end up sometimes feeling pressure to hire their relatives for jobs, even when those relatives may not be the best person for the job. And I think the idea is that, in sort of this context, there's a lot of unemployment. A job is really seen as a big chance and a big opportunity. And so sort of the family dynamics are such that, if you're there and you have this chance and this opportunity, you should really give that to someone in your family rather than going out and hiring some stranger. And this, again, is kind of consistent with some other recent work in economics, which suggests that sort of work, when people hire people for work, this is also serving kind of a redistributive role. Basically, the hypothesis of this project ties these two pieces of motivating evidence together. And it says maybe part of a reason we see some family hiring is not because of sort of trust or altruism, but because of these sort of norms in the family saying that you need to help out the family. And that this actually might lead some businesses to hire workers who privately they wouldn't really want to hire if they weren't related to them, but who they kind of feel pressure from the family to hire. And so the way that we test this is we basically offer we do a field experiment with employers where we offer them subsidies to hire new employees. And then we create some variation in the amount of pressure that they are going to feel from their family to hire someone from the family. And I'll describe to you how we do that later. And basically what we find is when you give employers excuses, at least some of them become less likely to hire from their family. So when they can go to their family and say, oh, I wasn't able to hire from it, they actually hire from their family less. Now, one thing I want to say up front is that this project is not a statement about the importance of family. Family is obviously really important. It's not a statement about sort of the importance of giving in the family. That's obviously very important. It's more, I think what this project is more just a statement of, the way that we think of jobs and the way that people are being allocated to jobs is maybe wrong. They are maybe serving more of a redistributive role than we think about in econ in general. So let me tell you really quickly about the setting that we work in. So we work with sort of very small, think of like small to medium or micro enterprises in Eastern Province, Zambia. These firms are pretty established. They've been around for sort of 8 years on average. And typically, most of the firms that we're going to work with are going to be retailers, but there are going to be a few sort of in manufacturing or agricultural processing. About half of them don't have any employees at baseline, 60% do. And conditional on having an employee, around half of the time, that employee is someone from the firm owner's extended family network. At baseline, there are sort of around half of these employers who kind of say that they agree with this idea that, they might feel pressure from the family to help out the family. And that there might be some kind of consequences if they don't do so. Around half don't agree with that and say that there are no issues with the family. Labor markets in this setting, I think, fairly typical for this kind of job. So a lot of the jobs that people are hiring for are, sort of entry-level work. Think of things like salespeople, shop assistants, mechanic, like people doing basic mechanics or carpentry. Jobs in this setting are going to be typically relatively short tenure. So we do a census of firms in this setting at baseline, and the typical employee in our census has been with a firm for around 1 year. And recruiting is typically going to be done fairly informally. So it's not like in the US where you post a job in LinkedIn or something. It's going to be sort of employers reaching out through their networks to try and hire someone, or employees coming and maybe asking employers for jobs, kind of cold calling. So what do we want to do in this project? What we want to try and understand is, would firms change who they would hire if they didn't have this pressure from the family, potentially? The way we want to do that is, for some firms, we want to just sort of see who they hire naturally. And for other firms, we want to sort of create an environment for them where kind of the background family in a way disappears, and see if the extended family to some extent disappeared and they knew they could kind of hire whoever they wanted, would that end up sort of changing their hiring decision? Now, the way that economists typically will try and vary sort of social pressure or social norms is by doing public-private treatments. And so the idea there is, I might go to an employer and ask them privately, who would you like to hire? And I might go, gather the employer with all of their family, and then go to the employer again and ask them who would they like to hire. And the idea is that, if there's some kind of pressure from the family, maybe when your family is, right around you, you're more likely to say, oh, I'll hire my cousin. Whereas if I ask you privately, maybe you say, oh, I'll ignore my cousin, I'll hire this guy outside. The problem with that kind of design in this setting is that employment at the end of the day is going to be public, right? Like, you're going to hire this person, he's going to be in your business. So even if you make the decision publicly or privately, who you end up hiring is going to be observed by others. And so we can't do that kind of a design in this setting. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to try and create these posters, this technology, which allow employers to kind of create excuses for a family, so to the family about who they hired. So even though who they end up hiring will be visible, what employers learn about why that person was hired is going to be different. So let me explain to you about how we do that. So in our project, what we did is we went to employers and we offered employers a subsidy to hire a worker for 3 months. And then we let employers, to some degree, select who they wanted to hire for that job. So they had to sort of identify a related candidate and an unrelated candidate. Then before they decided exactly who they wanted to hire, we told the businesses that we were going to give them these 2 posters, and these posters they were going to have to place on their business when they received the subsidy. So in the control group, what the poster stated was that this employer received a subsidy to hire someone, and that they were able to choose who to hire. So the idea there is that if people showed up and saw this new employee, they would know that this was the choice of the employer. In the treatment group, we gave them a plausible deniability poster. And essentially what that did was that tried to allow employers to create, like, to make excuses for their family. And basically what that poster said was that many employers who received the subsidy weren't able to select themselves who they ended up hiring for the job. So the idea of something like that is that, if you got that poster, maybe you could go out, hire a stranger. Like, your cousin shows up one day and he says, hey, why is this person here working in the business? Why didn't you hire my nephew? And then you point to the poster and you can say, hey, I would have loved to hire my nephew, but this program told me I had to hire this outside person. I wasn't in control of it. And so we give employers these 2 kinds of posters, and then basically what we just measure is who they end up hiring with this subsidy. That's all we do. Now, one thing I do want to flag on this slide is that this is not exactly the design that we used. There's a little bit more going on in the background in terms of sort of creating some noise in the process and exactly which kinds of subsidies people received, so that these posters weren't deception. So if you're interested in looking at that, you can sort of look at the paper on my website. That was sort of the basic experiment design. And throughout the experiment, we did sort of a series of different surveys. So we did a baseline listing of firms to sort of create a sample. We then went and offered these subsidies to these employers in these different treatment groups, and we looked at who they ended up choosing to hire. And then for a selection of these firms, we actually implemented these subsidies. And so we went back to these businesses time after time after time, and then looked at whether they actually ended up hiring this person. Now, we did this with SurveyCTO software, which was very easy and great to use for just sort of typical survey needs. A few things that we did that were a little bit more of an extension, I guess, with this software that were really helpful for us. So one thing that it did is it allowed us to sort of take photos in the survey of these businesses and then sort of archive these photos in a way that we could sort of map them to the survey. That was really, really useful for tracking these businesses because sometimes these businesses moved around. And so we couldn't necessarily just go back to a particular place, but we were able to sort of go back and find businesses based on the photo we had. The other thing was it allowed us to collect some really great geospatial data. So whenever we did our surveys, we took a geotag of a business, and SurveyCTO has this great integration with Google Earth where you can really easily load that into Google Earth and create like a map of all these firms in the cities we were working in. So that was really cool and easy to use. Another thing that it allows you to do is you can use this feature where you can have someone walk and create like a bounding box around an area. So you not only can take a geographic reference of a point, but also of a particular area. And that was great for us because, where we were working, we didn't have maps of where all the markets were, which are these big areas in the city. And so what we could do is we could just send surveyors with a tablet to sort of walk around the boundaries, and then that would really easily also pop up on the map. So that was great to be able to sort of take some of this survey data, but also link it to some of this geographic data. So let me now walk you through a couple of the key results in our experiment. So the first thing we found was that when employers could make an excuse to their family, they ended up hiring their relatives a little bit less. So you can see that sort of in the status quo, around 60% of employers hired their relative when they got this subsidy. When employers got this poster that allowed them to go to others and say, hey, I would have loved to hire you, I couldn't, that dropped to 45% of the time. So it dropped by 15 percentage points. Now, that's a meaningful effect. It's not everything. So like clearly, even with the poster, 45% of people are still hiring from their family. So there's clearly still a lot of demand for hiring family for other reasons other than pressure. But it shows that this is maybe kind of a meaningful force for people's decisions. You might worry about sort of the poster operating through other channels that don't have anything to do with family pressure. So we then cut out this treatment effect by firms at baseline who said they do face family pressure and those at baseline who say they don't face family pressure. And what you can see is that really it's these firms who say they face family pressure where giving them this poster really has a meaningful impact. So the left-hand side is the treatment effect for firms who do say that they face this family pressure to hire members of their family. And on the right-hand side, you can see for firms who say, oh, no, I don't face pressure from my families to hire them. There's basically no effect of the poster. So that's kind of consistent with maybe this being the mechanism behind driving these choices. I don't have time to sort of go through it today, but in the paper and in the research project, we do a bunch of other things. So we also sort of cut the data by employers who are worried about the performance of their employees. And again, you can see that the poster really operates on those employers who have concerns about how well their related employee will work for them. And those who think that their family member is going to work great, the poster has no impact, which you'd expect. We then do some work to kind of measure the productivity impacts of hiring people who you're related to versus not. And what we find is that we do this one task and we find there that related employees actually work less well for employers than unrelated employees. And it's not because they're just intrinsically less able. They actually are sort of the same ability as the unrelated employees in the hiring pool. But when they're matched with with someone they're related to as an employer, they work a little bit less well, at least sort of in the short term. Just to conclude, what do we take away from this? What it suggests is that, maybe the way we think about jobs being allocated in firms is a little bit off. Sometimes I think there are these more complicated family dynamics that matter for employers' hiring decisions. Not saying these are good, not saying these are bad. Family is really, really important. But I think it's something we need to consider when we're thinking about policies designed to help firms hire. This is clearly an important thing that's going on in the background for firms, and we should incorporate it into sort of our set of policies, thinking about why employers hire who they do. And I think sort of just more broadly, thinking of jobs really as sort of, a big opportunity and a big chance for people, and something that, you might want to redistribute to others who you're really close to, I think is kind of, again, fundamentally different from the way we typically think of jobs and is something important to think about for policy. So yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. That was so interesting. And Shashwat, I'll let you present now.
So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today, I'm going to present a snapshot of my doctoral work. I'll quickly go over the project's motivation, discuss my theoretical expectations or the hypotheses, describe my empirical case, talk a bit about the data and the research design, and conclude by addressing some implications of my work. So why does this matter? Millions of poor households around the developing world rely on migration to cope with the poverty and economic uncertainty. While many of these migrants move across international borders, many more migrate internally within their own countries. So the global population of internal migrants has been estimated around 763 million, suggesting that the phenomenon affects at least 3 times as many people as international migrant flows. Recent reports published by the World Bank indicate that rule-out migration to cities is expected to intensify as local economic opportunities shrink due to the effects of slow onset climate change and rising agricultural stress. The question I'm looking to answer in this project is, how does outward migration reshape politics and citizen-state relations in migrant-sending societies? Specifically, I'm looking at the implications of these massive outflows of labor for political accountability in low and middle income countries. Past work on this question has yielded contradictory predictions. In my project, I test 2 such predictions regarding the political effects of migration in sending areas. First, I focus on the role of migrant remittances in changing the political incentive structures of remaining family members or left behind family members. Some theories imply that migrant remittances can stimulate political activism by relaxing resource constraints on political participation. There's a large literature in political science that shows that resources, particularly time, money, and civic skills, matter for who participates in politics. Some studies argue that remittances can reduce economic grievances and insecurities and free up resources for civic and political pursuits. Another way in which remittances can reshape local politics is by allowing people back home to opt out or extricate themselves from clientelistic relationships with their governments. So if you're receiving these money transfers from abroad on a regular basis, you're probably less likely to get swayed by vote buying appeals of political parties than someone who doesn't receive them. There's also a darker political side to remittances. There's some work to suggest that remittance transfers can diminish political participation in sending areas because they insure households against economic shocks and poor governance. By doing so, they make recipients less dependent on the state for basic services like education and healthcare, while also creating disincentives for citizens to engage or remain civically engaged, right? In addition to remittances, my project also looks at the role of migration in changing the demographic composition of left-behind households and what that implies for the distribution of political actors in sending societies. So some theories predict that migration increases the risk of sending communities losing their primary political actors. This is because, migrants are often positively selected on demographic attributes that also predict political activism. So the idea is that if migration removes those individuals from a household who are most likely to participate in politics, then we might expect these households to participate at significantly lower rates than similar households that do not have migrants. Another possibility is that migration creates opportunities for remaining members to make inroads into politics once the migrant leaves. You could imagine a scenario where the male head of household migrates and the women of the household gain more financial autonomy and social freedom to participate more actively in politics than they previously did. In such situations, we might expect migration to have a mobilizing effect on left-behind members relative to similarly placed members within non-migrant households. All right, just a little bit of context on why I chose India for this research. So India is the world's most populous country. It is home to an estimated 100 million internal migrants who engage in short-term circular work. Some key industries that employ labor migrants include agriculture, construction, textiles, brick-ins, street vending, and domestic work. Migration plays a huge role in sustaining rural livelihoods, accounting for about a third of all household consumption expenditure in rural India. Regions such as coastal Odisha, eastern UP, and North Bihar are particularly exposed to high levels of migration. I highlight North Bihar because this is the region where I conducted my fieldwork. And just to give you all a bird's eye view of labor migration in India. So this is coastal Odisha. On India's east coast. This is one of the high migration regions. And then this is eastern UP and North Bihar, where I carried out my fieldwork. Both of these regions border Nepal to the north. So I just wanted to give you all a sense of where I carried out my fieldwork and data collection. I test my argument using three main sources of data. First, I use data from a nationally representative panel of rural households spanning over three waves, starting 1999 and ending 2014. So these panel data allow me to take advantage of temporal variation in a household's exposure to migration. I leverage the panel structure to estimate difference in differences model. The DID analysis focuses on outcomes that tap into more mundane forms of claim making over state institutions, including whether somebody from the household attended a village meeting or whether someone from a household approached an elected representative to solve a problem in the last 12 months. I also analyze observational data from an original face-to-face household survey in Madhubani, Bihar, which is a high migration corridor in eastern India. These data provide fine-grained information on migration particulars, remittance payments, and data on a much richer array of political outcomes, including turnout, campaign participation, office-seeking behavior, and political knowledge. The project also relies on insights from qualitative fieldwork, particularly focus groups, which I conducted in both high and low migration settlements to derive some of my hypotheses. I'm, of course, happy to talk more about the specifics of the research design in the Q&A if people are interested. Here are some pictures from my fieldwork. The first image shows team supervisors screening households for interviews and briefing potential respondents about the nature and goals of the study. The second picture shows an interview in progress while me taking notes in the background. A little bit about how I use SurveyCTO in my study. So I put together a team of 8 enumerators and 2 supervisors. My team conducted a total of 2012 interviews over a period of 3 months. We interviewed 1 individual per household. All interviews were conducted using SurveyCTO Collect mobile app on smartphones. The process was fairly intuitive right from the start, from designing the form to pilot testing it, and collecting data last mile and monitoring any incoming data in real time. So I particularly found SurveyCTO helpful with running automated quality checks on incoming data. I would receive regular warnings if these data failed any quality checks. This feature was particularly helpful in guiding sampling decisions and making sure that we weren't oversampling certain groups while undersampling others. The other part where I found SurveyCTO helpful was when we conducted a forced choice conjoint experiment, which was embedded in the household survey. The goal of the experiment was to uncover differences in citizen preferences for co-ethnic candidates during local elections. We decided not to include the conjoint analyses in the project because my experiment was a bit underpowered and I ran into some technical difficulties while implementing it. Having said that, I know quite a few people who successfully incorporated conjoint designs into their surveys, so I would definitely recommend checking this feature out. I'll now quickly go over the results and conclude. So in this table, I present results from the main difference in differences analyses. So the main coefficient of interest here is the interaction term, denoting the product of migration and time period. The analysis compares the rate of differential change in mean outcomes for households that experienced a migration between the two waves of the panel and those that did not. As you can see, coefficients for both outcomes are negative, which indicates that exposure to migration not only reduces household attendance in village meetings, but also diminishes claim making on the state over time. In the paper, I provide further evidence that these results satisfy the parallel trends assumption, which is critical to drawing valid causal inferences in a difference in differences framework. Again, I'm happy to talk more about this in the Q&A if people are interested. So this table presents results from the household survey, for which I received funding from SurveyCTO. These are OLS, ordinary least squares estimates of cross-sectional differences in formal political participation between left-behind members in migrant households and non-migrant households, right? Very broadly, these results corroborate the findings from the difference in differences analyses. I find that exposure to migration is negatively associated with participation of remaining or left-behind members in formal politics. What you're seeing here is that remaining members in migrant households are significantly less likely to vote, campaign, or run for official council positions compared to their counterparts in non-migrant households. These results are statistically significant and remain so even after accounting for some key potential confounders, including gender, education, ethnic identity, and social class. So basically, all of the factors that might predict, that might influence a household's migration decision, while also impacting their, propensity to participate in politics. So to conclude, my findings reveal that high levels of migration reduce household engagement with politics and the state in sending societies. I find that these effects extend beyond everyday interactions between citizens and the state to participation in various dimensions of formal politics, including turnout and campaign participation. I explored two mechanisms of disengagement in the paper. So I present suggestive evidence that among migrant households, so among those households that are experiencing economic migration, remittance transfers are negatively associated with efforts at securing government benefits. These findings suggest that receiving households over time become more and more dependent on remittances to satisfy core welfare and development needs. I also use descriptive data from the survey to show that migrants are positively selected on demographic attributes, particularly age, gender, and education, all of which strongly predict political activism in these contexts. Because migrants are predominantly male, relatively younger, and better educated than people they leave behind, their exit from the household has important political implications. On the whole, these findings support the broader argument that I'm trying to make in the paper, that migration can undermine demand-side accountability mechanisms in low and middle-income countries by intensifying civic apathy among citizens. A potential implication of my findings is that migration-induced citizen disengagement creates disincentives for local governments to invest in public services because people are, engaging in, self-provision, or people are relying on their community networks to meet their basic, development needs. So this might sort of disincentivize local governments and politicians from investing in local public infrastructure. This is something that I'm looking to explore in future work. And that's all I have for now. And thank you for listening. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Shashwat, for those really informative and interesting presentations. Seeing a lot of clapping from the chat and people saying that they found this really informative as well. So we just have a couple discussion questions from Lindo and I, from your host, and then we'll move on to the audience. So first up, we just wanted to ask each of you, what inspired you to research these topics? They're both very interesting and very unique questions. I'm just curious about the motivation behind them for both of you.
So for me, I was working on another project in Zambia during my PhD. It was working with trying to help farmers save more over the course of the agricultural year. And there, just sort of when I was chatting with people, taxi drivers, locals that I met, one thing that I was struck by was just how often people were complaining about mixing family with business, because really, so much is written about in economics about the opposite, about family and business going really well together. I remember there was this one taxi driver saying that he had sort of a farm that was outside of town, and he'd hired his extended family to go and manage the farm with him. And I was like, oh, how did that work out? How was the harvest? And he said, I have no idea. They took everything and ran away at the end of a farming season. So I just kept kind of hearing these anecdotes sort of over and over again. And so, it just struck me as something very, very different. And so I wanted to explore what was going on there.
Yeah, so just real life inspiration. Very interesting. And Shashwat, what about you?
What got me inspired to do this, before starting graduate school, I was working on a research project on migrant voting rights in India. So this project was funded by India's Federal Election Commission, and our mandate was to study the extent of political exclusion among India's temporary migrant workers and provide some recommendations on how we could facilitate their inclusion in the electoral process. The problem is that a lot of migrant workers in India are unable to vote in elections because they're away from their home constituencies, and it's incredibly hard for them to go back to their constituencies to cast their ballots. Working on this project kind of piqued my interest in questions of migration and governance more broadly. So that's how I got sort of inspired to, pursue this research.
Very interesting. Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's great to hear. And then another question for discussion is, drawing from your experiences with these and other projects, what tips would you offer to fellow researchers who are contemplating using SurveyCTO for that research?
Yeah, so on my side, what I would say is, especially as my career has developed, I've been working on sort of bigger and bigger projects. So now I'm working on a scale up in Malawi which is going to be with, thousands and thousands of farmers. I've been working on some projects in Burundi that cover, farmers in across many agricultural provinces. And especially as you get into bigger projects, there's just a lot of complications in doing these projects. It's a lot to manage. So I think that, one thing that's really great about SurveyCTO is just that it takes a little bit of the hassle out of these projects. So for example, one of the things that I really like about SurveyCTO is that there's this really helpful help desk. And so you sign up for SurveyCTO and you have some idea of if, I want to collect this kind of data, and you just don't know how to make the form work. And SurveyCTO has this thing where, you'll ask them a question like, this is what I'm trying to do. How do I do it? And they'll give you some feedback. But a lot of times in the end, they just say, okay, send me your form and I'll do it. I'll do it for you. And for me, I mean, this I think is, this is really great because, with these kinds of projects, there's a ton of phone calls going on. There's a million things to manage. And I think with, SurveyCTO, it has all these advanced features, but it also provides you kind of the support and backup to be able to use them and just get things done when they need to be done.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And Shashwat, any tips?
I would definitely recommend, anyone who's looking to use SurveyCTO to pilot their instrument as many times as possible to make sure that respondents really understand your questions and that the questions have a justifiable analytical value. This is something that I learned while fielding my own survey, and I had like certain ideas about how things will go on the field, but it's not until you pilot test your questionnaire that you realize many of the questions are sort of incomprehensible. for some questions, I had to really substantially revise the framing because we found that many of our respondents had trouble understanding them due to complicated sentence structures. There were also a lot of items that did not yield a lot of variation in responses, so we had to discard them. It's only through constant piloting that we learned about these items, and I would just encourage people to sort of pilot your instruments extensively, particularly in contexts where people might not be all that literate. They might not be able to understand the questions you're trying to ask and the concepts that you're trying to measure. So constantly thinking about how responses to these questions map onto the concepts, the theoretical concepts that you're trying to construct using those responses. I think it's a really good exercise while you're on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. No, that's great advice. Yeah, no, thank you both. Okay, we have quite a few questions in the Q&A. So, Linda, perhaps we can move forward. And we also just wanted to mention quickly before we get to your questions, if you are interested in checking out SurveyCTO yourself, here's some information in terms of how to get a hold of our business development team and ways that you can explore the platform for yourself. And of course, always remember to follow us on social media on your platform of choice. We post often and try to release a lot of content and resources there for users. So look forward to connecting in that way. All right, so Q&A. People have some good questions in here, so I'll just go through and start. And I believe the first one was for you, Shashwat, from Momita, and they wanted to know in your project, was the migration that you were measuring, would that be considered permanent or temporary movements?
That's a great question. I should have mentioned this in my presentation that in India, like labor migration is for the most part temporary. So you have, mostly young men, moving from small towns and villages to bigger cities where economic opportunities are more abundant. And most of these men would leave their families behind in the village. So their wives, children, parents, aunts and uncles. So a lot of the migration is temporary. And these migrants find work in, urban informal economy, construction, textiles. The reason why a lot of the migrants don't take their families with them is because the cost of living in cities is incredibly high and they cannot afford to bring their families with them. Or there is a small fraction of labor migration that is permanent or semi-permanent in character, where you have the family following the migrant after a few cycles, but that is incredibly rare. For the most part, we see people just leaving their immediate families behind in the village to pursue livelihood opportunities in cities.
Yep. No, thanks. That's so good to know. Okay, Nicholas, you answered a question through chat, but I actually was going to ask you to speak to it for the group because other people might be interested. So Simeon wanted to know if your study employed a choice experiment approach, and I just wondered if you could describe that for us a little bit.
I think I know what a choice experiment is. I mean, I think that there was I guess there was sort of a choice in the sense that business owners were sort of choosing who to hire, and that was sort of an outcome variable in the study. And then not only did we have them choose, but then we actually implemented that choice for business owners. So it wasn't just sort of a hypothetical kind of vignette, who would you hire, but it was actually sort of an incentive of compatible choice. So a choice that had kind of real stakes for these business owners.
Yeah. Yep. Great. Thank you. Okay. And then lots of good questions for both of you. Let's get down to Josu's question. So Josu says, question for you both. How long did it take you to conduct the experiments and come up with the article or the report? And what difficulties did you encounter? And I know you probably both touched on some of that, but if you could just speak to the challenges a little bit more. Nicholas, if you want to start.
Yeah, sure. So this has actually been kind of a project that's been going on for 4 or 5 years for me. What I presented today is just sort of one small part of the overall project. So there's also this was part of a project was done with urban firms last year. There was another part of a project that was done in rural areas 2 or 3 years before that. Right now, I'm writing up the paper. The publication process in economics is pretty long, so there is an article out there, but it's not polished and it's not published yet, but I hope it will be one day.
Okay.
What difficulties, one of the biggest challenges actually for this project was that I started it before COVID. And so we did this sort of pilot, and that was really exciting pre-COVID. And then COVID happened, and sort of all in-person research shut down for a little while, and then we had to sort of restart this in a safe way after COVID happened. So that was kind of a tricky, unique situation that hopefully others don't have to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully that won't happen again. Okay. And Shashwat, what about you? How long did it take to do the experiments, come up with the article? What difficulties or challenges come to mind?
Uh, for the survey, I think the most challenging part was to get the approvals from the local administration, because we selected about 100 village councils, which are synonymous with counties here in the US and many countries. So, we had some of our team members visit these councils to seek the permission of the local councillor before we could carry out data collection. A lot of councillors were cooperative and they were really understanding, but some of them were suspicious of our motives. They were wondering why we wanted to survey people in their councils, and then we had to explain to them that we drew a representative sample, and it's just by sheer luck or random chance that your councils were selected for the surveys. So we had a hard time explaining to the councillors why we were trying to do this project in their jurisdictions. But we did get a lot of support from the district administration. So we had official letterhead of the district magistrate, who was sort of he is the final authority in a district. And he issued us a letter to carry out survey work in the entire district. So that made things a lot easier for us. The other thing about facing challenges in the field is I think we faced a bit of trouble with the conjoint experiment, because the way these experiments are conceived, respondents are asked to choose between two candidates who are just hypothetical candidates running for an election. And we had a lot of respondents who did not want to choose either of those two candidates. And despite, nudging them to choose one of them, so the experiment sort of randomized, the education background, the caste identity, and there was one more attribute that we randomized to see what candidates people prefer, mainly looking at whether, people prefer their co-ethnics over others, no matter the qualifications. But yeah, we ran into sort of power issues, mainly because a lot of the respondents found it hard to comprehend the question and the design, and more importantly, they refused to sort of one of the two candidates, and that was something that was really interesting for us, because a lot of times we come up with these interesting designs that allow us to causally isolate the effect of certain attributes on preferences, but in a very rural setting, where people people are illiterate and they might not be as well discerning. I think it can be incredibly challenging to get responses. So I would say that, I think if you can use visuals for such populations in a conjoint design, I would definitely do that.
Very interesting. Yeah. Just the realities of field work and all the different things to account for is could just talk about that forever. The last question quickly that I would love for you both to answer, kind of similarly, can you let us know if you're satisfied with your findings and what is the way forward on these projects? That's from Ken and I.
Yeah, no, I think in terms of research, the results are what the results are. I think you have to just be satisfied with the methods. As long as you think you did a decent data collection,
Yeah.
I think whatever you find, you have to be satisfied with. I was excited to find what I found because I thought this was interesting and I was excited to share it with others. But even if I hadn't found it, it would have been okay. What is the way forward? I think probably for Shashwat and I, it's for both of us, it's trying to polish up the results and get this done and presented more and published.
All right. Well, hopefully we are helping to spread the word a bit. And Shashwat, were you satisfied with your findings and how would you talk about the way forward?
I would just echo what Nick said. And for me, like the findings were a bit counterintuitive and I didn't expect to be, I didn't expect to see such a massive kind of disengagement effect. But, the results are what they are. And the next step is to frame an argument around these results and to make a case for why, we see these results in the first place. So I think theorizing, going back to the drawing board and, going back to the literature and placing these findings in past work and basically showing how, these results sort of illuminate scholarly debates in the field. That is the challenge. And my plan is to sort of, put together a paper with these findings and send it to a journal, hopefully sometime later this year, and see how it goes from there. Yeah.
All right. Well, very exciting. Please let us know, both of you, when those articles are published. And thank you so much for sharing your work and your findings with us today and your methods. And thank you everyone for joining us.